I have been driving these streets of New York for 30 years, and I have seen everything in my rearview mirror: executives bawling after losing everything in the stock market, couples fighting before signing divorce papers, rich people pretending to be happy, and poor people pretending to be okay. But the woman who got into my car on that snowy night brought a silence that screamed louder than any siren on Broadway. She was wearing a Burberry coat that cost more than my taxi, but her eyes had that hunger of someone who has slept in the gutter and never forgot the smell of desperation. When we stopped at the red light near Fifth Avenue, she pointed to a lit-up mansion full of Christmas lights and rich people celebrating, and said something that changed the course of the entire conversation. 6 months ago, I was kicked out of that house in front of 200 people. Today, I own the building where they work. And that was when I understood that was not just any passenger, that was someone who had died and resurrected with a different name and the bank balance of a small country. What she told me during that ride was not just a story about money or revenge. It was a brutal and honest lesson on how the world works when you stop believing in divine justice and start building your own. She told me that people get it wrong when they think the game ends when you are publicly humiliated, thrown out of the party, and left with $500 in the snow. The game only ends when you decide it is over, and she decided it was not. What happened next involved billions of dollars, fake identities, secret investigations, DNA that revealed an impossible truth, and a downfall so spectacular for the family that destroyed her that it made headlines in every financial newspaper in the country. If you think you know turnaround stories, get ready, because this one will teach you that those who kick you on the way up are the exact same ones who will beg on their knees on your way down. She entered my taxi with that type of silence that weighs more than any luggage. The snow was falling slowly outside, but inside the car the air was dense, as if something invisible had entered with her. I looked in the mirror and saw her face illuminated by the lights of Fifth Avenue, impeccable makeup, Italian wool coat, but her red eyes gave away that all that luxury armor could no longer hold back what was inside. She took a deep breath and said quietly, "Driver, have you ever been humiliated in front of 200 people?" I did not answer. I just adjusted the mirror to hear better, because when someone starts a conversation like that, you know the story is going to hurt. She started talking slowly, like someone saying something out loud for the first time. She said that a few months ago, at a sumptuous Christmas party inside a 5-star hotel in Manhattan, she had been the target of an ambush orchestrated by her husband's own family. 200 guests from the New York financial elite, crystal chandeliers, French champagne, a live orchestra playing classic Christmas versions. Everything was perfect until the moment she realized that all eyes turned to her, not with admiration, but with that morbid expectation of someone who knows something terrible is about to happen. Her mother-in-law, a woman with an old surname and a frozen heart, walked up to her holding a glass of champagne, and in front of everyone threw the golden liquid in her face while saying loudly, "You were never worthy of this family." What came next was worse than the liquid running down her face. Her husband Lucas got up on the stage where minutes before they were singing Christmas carols and grabbed the microphone. He announced the divorce right there on a live social media stream with photographers and guests filming every second. And he did not stop there. He introduced the world to his new fiancée, Diane, a blonde heiress who was pregnant and smiling next to him as if that were a coronation. The audience was not horrified. They did not intervene. They did not defend her. They applauded some, laughed others, took photos. She stood there alone in the middle of that hall like a play that no one wanted to watch anymore, but everyone wanted to record to talk about later. She told me she tried to leave, but security blocked the doors. Her father-in-law, Gregory, a man with a tailored suit and a narrow soul, appeared with a manila envelope and placed it in front of her. It was the divorce papers and a prenup she had signed years earlier when she was too young to understand the traps hidden between the lines. He said she would get nothing, not the house, not the car, not a cent of the savings she herself had helped build when she worked 3 jobs to support her husband while he finished his MBA. Gregory put a pen in her hand and ordered, "Sign now or leave with the police." She signed because she had no choice, because she was alone, because no one there cared if she lived or died after that. When she finished signing, Gregory threw a thin envelope with $500 on her table charity, he said as if it were a divine favor. The security guards grabbed her by the arms and dragged her to the back door where snow was already piling up on the empty sidewalks. She left through the service door, the same one used by waiters and the trash, while inside the party continued as if nothing had happened. I stopped the car at the red light and looked at her in the mirror. "And where did you go?" I asked. She smiled, but it was not a smile of joy, it was the kind of smile of someone who knows the story is just beginning. She looked out the window as the taxi glided through the lit streets of Manhattan, and I realized the worst of the story had not been told yet. "Do you know what is crueler than public humiliation, driver?" she asked without taking her eyes off the passing buildings. "It is finding out that you were disposable from day one." I adjusted the heater because I felt a chill that did not come from outside, and she continued. That prenup she had signed years ago was not just a document for asset protection like the rich do, it was a legal trap designed specifically to ensure she never had a right to anything, not even what she herself had built. When she married Lucas, she was 22 years old, an orphan since she was 15, and worked as a waitress, a supermarket cashier, and a nanny on weekends. He was the son of a traditional family that pretended to have more money than they actually possessed at the time. She loved that man with the intensity of someone who never had a family and saw in him the promise of belonging somewhere. But his family saw her only as a temporary tool, someone who would work, support, serve, and then be discarded when she was no longer necessary. The agreement she signed said in fancy legal language that any value she contributed to the marriage would be considered a voluntary and irrevocable gift, and that in case of separation, she waived any claim on assets, properties, or companies of the Ashford family. She told me that during the first 5 years of marriage, while Lucas finished his master's in administration and tried to build a career, it was she who paid the rent, bought food, paid off credit card debts, and even funded his first company with the savings she gathered from triple shifts. $8,000 of hard-earned money, every penny conquered with calloused hands and aching feet. When his company finally took off and his father-in-law invested capital to expand, she was gently removed from financial decisions. "You have already done your part. Darling," they told her now, "let the men take care of business." And she, naive and in love, believed she was being spared from stress, when in reality, she was being removed from what was rightfully hers. At the moment of public humiliation at that Christmas party, when Gregory put the divorce papers in front of her and forced her to sign right there, he made a point of reading out loud so that all the guests could hear the clauses of the prenup. He laughed while saying she had no right to anything, that the $8,000 she had invested were considered a gift, and that even the jewelry Lucas had given her over the years technically belonged to the Ashford family because they had been bought with a corporate card. The audience murmured, some shook their heads with fake pity, but no one stood up to say that was unfair. Injustice only bothers people when it happens to them. When she finished signing all the papers with a trembling hand, Gregory took the envelope with the $500, held it in front of her face, and said, "This is more than you deserve. You should be thankful for not leaving here in debt." Then he turned to the guests and announced with a smile, "Now that we have cleaned the house, we can truly celebrate Christmas as a family." The laughter echoed through the hall as the security guards dragged her out. She told me that the last thing she saw before being pushed into the street was Lucas kissing Diane on stage, while her pregnant belly stole the spotlight. I took a deep breath and asked, "And where did you go with $500 on a snowy night?" She closed her eyes and replied to Hell Driver. But that was where I found my salvation. The snow was falling harder now, and the taxi moved slowly down 7th Avenue as she continued the story. She told me that after being thrown onto the street that Christmas night, she walked aimlessly for almost an hour with her coat soaked and her high heels sinking into the dirty snow on the sidewalks. People passed by her in a hurry, no one stopped, no one asked if she was okay. New York has this cruel way of making you feel invisible even when you are bleeding in the middle of the crowd. She ended up going into a 24-hour diner, one of those cheap ones smelling of old oil with flickering fluorescent lights, where the only customers were truck drivers and people who had nowhere to go. It was 3 in the morning when she sat on a cracked vinyl bench, ordered a coffee that cost $1.50, and stared at her phone. The battery was at 8%. She had tried calling a few friends, but all calls went straight to voicemail or were forwarded because no one wants to associate with someone who just lost everything in a city where your value is measured by your bank account. She opened her wallet and counted the bills, $473, because she had spent part of the money on the coffee and the tip she left for the waitress, even though she was broke. "I know what it is like to serve people who do not see you." She told me I was not going to become what they were. It was at that moment, sitting in that dirty diner at 3 in the morning, looking at her own reflection in the foggy glass, that she hit rock bottom. It was not just the lack of money or a home. It was the feeling that her entire life had been a lie. She had believed in love, had worked to the bone, had sacrificed her dreams to build someone else's dreams, and in the end was discarded like trash. She told me that in that moment she thought about simply disappearing, taking the money she had, buying a bus ticket to anywhere, and starting from zero with a different name. But before she could make any decision, her phone rang. It was a private, restricted number, the kind you usually do not answer because you think it is a scam or telemarketing. But she was so lost, she answered without thinking. On the other end of the line, a female voice, polite and firm, asked, "Am I speaking to the lady who just left the Plaza Hotel?" Her heart raced. How did someone know where she was? The voice continued. "My name is Catherine Aldridge. I am a lawyer, and I need to speak with you about an extremely urgent and confidential matter. Can you tell me where you are right now?" She looked around the dirty diner and almost laughed at the irony. "I am at a diner on 42nd and 8th, she replied. The lawyer said, "Stay there. I will arrive in 10 minutes. I stopped the taxi at a red light and looked at her in the mirror. "And you stayed?" I asked. She nodded. "I stayed because I had nothing left to lose. When you are at rock bottom, any rope thrown from above looks like a chance for salvation, even if you do not know who is holding the other end." 10 minutes later, a woman in a black suit with a leather briefcase entered the diner, sat in front of her, and placed a thick envelope on the table with documents that would change everything. She looked at me with that bitter smile again and said, "That was when I discovered, driver, that my entire life had been based on a lie, but this time the lie was on my side." The lawyer, Catherine Aldridge, did not waste time with pleasantries. She opened the leather briefcase and placed a series of documents on the diner table: birth certificates, DNA tests, old photographs, and newspaper clippings yellowed by time. She looked into my passenger's eyes and said, "Do you know who Jonathan Wellington is?" My passenger shook her head, confused. Catherine continued. "Jonathan Wellington is the founder of Wellington Global Industries, one of the 5 largest real estate and investment conglomerates in the United States, estimated net worth of $6.2 billion, and he is dying." The silence that fell over that table was heavier than any word, because no one starts a conversation like that without a devastating reason. Catherine pushed an old photo to the center of the table. It was the image of a tall man with gray hair holding a newborn baby wrapped in a pink blanket. 33 years ago, Catherine began. Jonathan Wellington and his wife, Elizabeth, had a daughter. Her name was Magnolia Grace Wellington. 3 days after the birth, while Elizabeth was recovering in the hospital room, the baby was taken for routine exams and never came back. The nurse responsible disappeared. The police investigated for years, but the case went cold. Jonathan never stopped looking. My passenger looked at the photo, and something inside her started to shake, not from fear, but from impossible recognition. Catherine placed another document on the table, a recent DNA test. 6 months ago, Jonathan hired a new team of detectives and tracked down all the children born in that maternity ward in the same week. You were one of them. She told me she kept staring at those papers, unable to process what she was hearing. Catherine explained that the nurse who kidnapped her was a woman named Dorothy Hayes, who suffered from severe mental disorders and believed she deserved to have a daughter that God had denied her. Dorothy raised my passenger as if she were her own, invented a fake adoption story, and lived hiding in small towns until she died in a car accident when the girl was 15. From then on, she grew up alone in shelters and foster homes, without knowing that on the other side of the country, a billionaire father was spending fortunes trying to find her. The DNA tests do not lie. Catherine said, pushing the report closer. "You are Magnolia Grace Wellington. You are the only legitimate heir of Jonathan Wellington." Her head was spinning. How is it possible that in a single night you are kicked out of a mansion like trash and discover that you are actually the heir to an empire of billions? Catherine saw the confusion on her face and added something that made everything even more urgent. "Jonathan is in the terminal stage of cancer. Doctors give him at most 6 months. He wants to meet you before he leaves. He wants to give you what is yours by right. But there is a problem. There is always a problem. There is always a trap. There is always someone in the way." Catherine pulled out another document, a power of attorney and corporate records. "Jonathan's brother, Raymond Wellington, has been managing the company for years. He knows of your existence now and is doing everything to prevent this reunion. Because if Jonathan dies without an updated will, recognizing you, Raymond inherits everything." My passenger looked at me in the mirror and said that night I had 2 choices. Driver continue being the disposable orphan that everyone stepped on their whole life, or become Magnolia Grace Wellington and claim what was mine by blood. She took the pen Catherine offered and signed the papers that authorized the lawyers to act on her behalf, that confirmed her identity, and that set the meeting with the father she never knew. When the sun rose over New York that morning, she was no longer the woman humiliated at the Christmas party. She was the lost daughter who was about to flip the entire game. And as the taxi moved through the waking city, I knew her story was just starting to get interesting. The meeting happened 3 days later in a mansion in Connecticut that looked more like a museum than a house. She told me that when the armored car of the legal team stopped in front of the iron gate, her heart was beating so fast, she thought she was going to faint. Catherine walked beside her through the snow-covered garden, passing frozen fountains and marble sculptures until they reached a huge room with floor-to-ceiling windows and a lit fireplace warming the space. And there, sitting in a leather armchair with a blanket over his legs, was Jonathan Wellington. He was a tall man, even sitting down, with completely white hair and deep blue eyes that seemed to have lived all the pains of the world. When he saw her enter, tears fell uncontrollably. He said nothing for the first few minutes, just looked at her like someone looking at a miracle. Then he extended a trembling hand and asked her to come closer. "Magnolia," he whispered, and the name came out of his mouth like a prayer kept for 33 years. She knelt beside the armchair and he touched her face with cold, fragile hands, tracing every line as if he were memorizing a work of art. "I never stopped looking for you," he said with a broken voice. "Not a single day of my life." She told me that in that moment she felt something she had never felt before: belonging. It was not about the money, it was not about the empire, it was about finally having someone who looked at her as if she truly mattered. Jonathan spent hours telling stories she never knew. He showed photo albums of her mother Elizabeth, who had died of heartbreak 5 years after the kidnapping, unable to bear the pain of a lost daughter. He told her about the toy rooms he kept intact for years, about the detectives who scoured the country for clues, about the nights he cried alone in his office because he could not protect his own daughter. And then he said something that changed everything. "I do not have more time. Magnolia, the doctors gave me 6 months, but I know it is less. I want you to have everything that is yours. I want you to take over the empire I built. Not because you need to prove anything to anyone, but because it is your place by right of blood." But there was a silent war happening behind the scenes. Raymond Wellington, Jonathan's younger brother, had been managing Wellington Global Industries for 15 years and lived as if he were the real owner. He had an apartment in Manhattan, a private jet lovers scattered across 3 continents, and a reputation as a ruthless man in business. When he learned of Magnolia's existence, Raymond did not come to welcome her. He sent lawyers with restraining orders, alleging that Jonathan was senile, manipulated, and incapable of making decisions. He filed lawsuits to block any changes to the will and spread rumors in the press that this woman was an opportunistic imposter trying to steal the inheritance of a traditional family. Jonathan held her hand tightly and said, "He will fight. He will try to destroy you. He will use all the money, all the power, and all the influence I gave him against you, but I will not let that happen." He called Catherine and a team of lawyers who entered the room carrying boxes of documents. Over the following weeks, while Jonathan still had strength, He transferred shares, reorganized holdings, created irrevocable trusts, and legally armored the assets to ensure Magnolia was recognized as the legitimate heir before it was too late. She told me that it was during this period that he told her something she would carry forever. Revenge is not about destroying those who hurt you, Magnolia. It is about building something so big that they become irrelevant. And that was exactly what she decided to do. Jonathan Wellington did not hand billions of dollars to an unprepared woman and expect her to survive the sharks. He knew the corporate world was a gladiator arena where feelings are worth nothing and weakness is punished with destruction. So he did something few fathers would do. He put her in a kind of intensive training camp that would last months. She told me she was taken to an isolated property upstate, far from the media, far from New York, far from anyone who could recognize her. There, she would be deconstructed and reconstructed from scratch. Not as the orphan waitress who believed in fairy tales, but as Magnolia Grace Wellington, heir to an empire that moved billions and employed thousands. The team Jonathan hired to train her had nothing gentle or maternal about them. They were former Wall Street executives, image consultants, corporate etiquette specialists, finance professors, and even a former FBI agent specialized in reading body language. They woke her up at 5 in the morning for stock market classes at 7. She studied contracts and legal clauses at 9. She had posture and nonverbal communication classes in the afternoon. She dove into financial reports of Wellington Global Industries, and at night they simulated board meetings where she was verbally attacked for hours to learn not to waver under pressure. They broke me first, she told me, because you cannot rebuild a house on a cracked foundation. She learned to read balance sheets like someone reading novels, memorized the names of major shareholders, studied every acquisition and merger the company had made in the last 20 years. But more important than the numbers, she learned something fundamental: the difference between real power and performative power. The truly rich do not scream driver, she explained to me. They whisper, and the whole world shuts up to listen. She learned to control her breathing before speaking, to use strategic pauses, to never justify her decisions, and to transform every look into a tool of dominance. She stopped being reactive and became calculating. She stopped being emotional and became surgical. The physical transformation was equally radical. She cut her hair at a Manhattan salon where every cut cost more than her old rent, hired a personal trainer who woke her up at 4 in the morning for heavy workouts, completely changed her wardrobe to high fashion pieces that communicated authority without needing words. She learned to walk in high heels like someone parading on a runway, to sit with impeccable posture, even in uncomfortable chairs, to shake hands with a firmness that does not ask for, but demands respect. And the most important thing, she created a new temporary identity, a code name, a disguise, because she knew that when the time came to act, no one from the Ashford family could recognize her until it was too late. The chosen name was Malene Grant, a fictitious international investor with a history built by corporate intelligence experts. They created profiles on corporate social networks, published fake articles in business magazines, planted mentions in financial podcasts, and even created stakes in smaller companies to give credibility. Malene Grant had a slight British accent, used designer glasses that changed her face, always dressed in neutral power tones, and had a reputation for being ruthless in negotiations. When she was ready, not even Jonathan recognized her immediately. She was no longer the woman who walked into his mansion months ago. She was someone else. And this person was about to enter the most dangerous game of her life, revenge. Before attacking Magnolia, knew she needed ammo. It was not enough to have money or power. She needed information that would destroy the credibility of the Ashfords from the inside out. Jonathan put at her disposal a team of private investigators who did not appear in any public record, people who worked in the shadows and knew how to dig up secrets people thought were buried forever. She told me that the first meeting with these investigators happened in an office with no sign on the wall, where men in dark suits and neutral expressions placed thick folders on her table full of information that would make anyone lose sleep. "What do you want to know?" one of them asked. She answered without hesitation. "Everything, every lie, every betrayal, every crime. I want to know where it hurts." The investigation started with Lucas, the ex-husband. In 2 weeks, the investigators discovered that he was not the brilliant businessman he pretended to be. The company he managed was on the verge of bankruptcy, sustained only by investments from his father-in-law and fraudulent loans he hid from the family. But the worst was in the small details, those that cut deeper than any financial scandal. They discovered that Lucas had embezzled her savings, those $8,000 she gathered in years of triple work. He did not just take the money, he forged her signature on documents, opened lines of credit in her name, and left debts she did not even know existed. While she thought she was building a future alongside him, Lucas was building her financial ruin. But the most devastating discovery involved Diane, the new pregnant wife who had replaced my passenger at that Christmas party. The investigators tracked her movements in the 6 months prior to the wedding and found something that would make any soap opera seem amateur. Diane was not pregnant by Lucas. The biological father of the baby was a tennis instructor with whom she had an affair while she was still engaged to another rich man who had discarded her. When she discovered the pregnancy, Diane panicked and looked for the easiest and most desperate target she could find: Lucas Ashford, a man in a midlife crisis who had just been pressured by his family to divorce his inadequate wife. She seduced, got pregnant, and convinced Lucas the child was his, ensuring a quick marriage and access to the family fortune. Gregory Ashford, the father-in-law, also did not escape the investigation unscathed. The detectives discovered a web of real estate fraud he had been operating for years. Overpriced properties sold to foreign investors, bribes to public officials to approve illegal projects, and even money laundering through shell companies registered in tax haven. He built the reputation of a respectable businessman, while behind the facade he was just another white-collar criminal who used expensive lawyers to avoid prison. And his wife, the mother-in-law who had thrown champagne in my passenger's face, also had her secrets, an affair of years with the family's private driver, and a secret bank account in Switzerland fueled with money embezzled from the company. Magnolia spent months reviewing every document, every photo, every recording. She told me there were nights she stayed awake until dawn, not from anger but from something colder and more calculated determination. Emotional revenge is loud and ineffective, driver, she explained to me. Strategic revenge is silent and absolute. She organized everything into separate dossiers, created timelines, identified the weak points of each family member, and designed a plan that would leave no exit. When she finished, she held the power to destroy the Ashfords in every way possible: legal, financial, social, and emotional. But before using that power, she needed one thing: access. And for that, she would need to get close to them without being recognized. That was where Malene Grant came in. Magnolia's first move was so simple it seemed impossible to work, but she knew something about arrogant people. They never expect their victims to come back in disguise. Malene Grant, the fictitious international investor, scheduled a meeting with Ashford Properties through corporate intermediaries, presenting herself as a representative of a European investment fund interested in injecting capital into promising American companies. The bait was too juicy to ignore: $10 million in immediate investment, with the possibility of expansion to $50 million if the results were satisfactory. She told me that when the email arrived in Gregory Ashford's inbox, he replied in less than an hour, asking to set up a meeting as soon as possible. Money talks louder than any caution. The meeting happened in an office in the heart of Manhattan, in one of those mirrored glass buildings where each floor is worth more than entire neighborhoods. Magnolia entered dressed in a charcoal gray Armani suit, hair tied in an impeccable bun, Italian frame glasses that completely changed her face, and a posture that did not ask permission to exist. She carried a leather briefcase with fake documents prepared by experts, spoke with a slight British accent, and maintained a neutral expression that betrayed no emotion. Gregory and Lucas were in the meeting room, waiting, dressed in their best suits, rehearsed fake smiles, and all the arrogance of those who think they are about to trick another naive investor. Neither of them recognized the woman sitting in front of them. For 2 hours, Malene Grant asked technical questions about the company's projects, analyzed spreadsheets, questioned projections, and acted exactly as an experienced investor would act. Lucas tried to impress her with empty corporate jargon. Gregory tried to seduce her with promises of absurd returns, and she just wrote everything down with an impassive expression. At the end of the meeting, she closed the folder, looked into both of their eyes, and said, "You have serious structural problems in this company, hidden debts, unrealistic projections, and amateur management, but I see potential if there are radical changes in administration." Gregory almost choked on the brutal honesty, but the smell of $10 million was too strong to let pride speak louder. He asked what would be necessary to close the investment. Magnolia, still as Malene, placed a list of demands on the table: total access to accounting books, independent audit, restructuring of the board, and weekly follow-up meetings where she would be present. She knew that each of these demands would open doors to expose the frauds the investigators had discovered, but Gregory and Lucas were too desperate to notice the trap. They accepted everything, signed preliminary contracts, gave access to confidential documents, and best of all, invited Malene Grant to a dinner at the family mansion the following weekend, where all members of the Ashford clan would be present, including Diane, the pregnant wife, who had no idea her castle of lies was about to crumble. When she left that building that afternoon, Magnolia told me she felt something she had never felt before: pure power. Not the power to scream or threaten, but the power of being inside the enemy fortress without anyone noticing. "They called me trash driver," she told me with that smile that was not of joy, but of cold justice. Now they were serving me champagne and begging me to accept their money. The Trojan horse was inside the gates. The city was going to fall. It was just a matter of time, and the dinner at the mansion would be the perfect stage to start tearing down brick by brick the family that destroyed her. The dinner happened on a Saturday night in the same mansion where months before my passenger had been humiliated and kicked out like trash. She told me that when the car stopped at the entrance, her heart accelerated not from fear, but from a cold euphoria that comes when you know you are about to turn the tables on those who trampled you. The mansion was lit up like a postcard, golden lights in the windows, freshly fallen snow in the gardens, and the sound of classical music leaking through the doors. The butler opened the door and received her with reverence, calling her Mrs. Grant, and she entered through that same main door that had never been allowed to her when she was just the disposable wife. This time, she did not enter as a victim, she entered as a predator. Gregory and his wife Veronica were in the living room, waiting with wine glasses in hand and rehearsed smiles of fake hosts. Lucas was by the fireplace, and next to him, Diane, her pregnant belly already quite evident, dressed in an expensive silk dress that had probably been paid for with the money that should have gone to my passenger. They greeted Malene Grant with all the pomp and fake politeness rich people use when they want to impress investors. "It is an honor to have you in our house," Gregory said, extending his hand. She shook it firmly and replied with a controlled voice, "The honor is mine. It is always interesting to meet the families behind the businesses," and as she spoke, her eyes swept every corner of that room, every object, every detail she knew by heart, but now saw with different eyes. During dinner, served at a long mahogany table with silver cutlery and porcelain plates that cost more than a car, the conversation revolved around business investments and future expansions. Lucas talked non-stop, trying to impress Malene with made-up stories of business success, while Diane feigned interest, and Veronica threw fake charm like someone throwing confetti. But at a certain moment of the night, the conversation slipped into something more personal. Gregory, already on his third glass of wine, started talking about the importance of cleaning the house of inadequate elements. He said, laughing, that he had recently gotten rid of someone who was sucking the family's resources, referring to his former daughter-in-law as if she were an eliminated parasite. Veronica agreed, saying that some people are born without class, and no money changes that. Magnolia, still disguised as Malene, kept a neutral expression while listening to every poisonous word come out of their mouths. She even asked, with fake interest, and what happened to that person, Lucas, feeling comfortable to speak because he thought he was among allies, told with disdain the story of the public divorce, the expulsion, the $500 of charity. He laughed while telling it, and Diane laughed along, holding her pregnant belly as if that were a funny anecdote and not the destruction of someone's life. Magnolia raised her wine glass and said with a soft voice, "Impressive, how some people manage to rebuild after being destroyed, isn't it?" The comment went unnoticed because none of them imagined that discarded orphan could even be alive. let alone sitting at their table wearing Chanel. When dinner ended and they walked her to the door, Gregory put his hand on her shoulder in a fake gesture of camaraderie and said, "I am sure we will do great business together, Mrs. Grant." She smiled and replied, "Oh, I am sure of that too. You have no idea what is coming." They interpreted that as investor confidence, but she knew it was a promise of destruction. She got into the car, took off the disguise glasses as soon as the door closed, and took a deep breath. She had been inside the wolf's den, had heard them mock her without knowing she was there, and now she had everything she needed. Confirmation that those people had no remorse, had no humanity, and deserved no pity. The next step would be the climax, and for that she would need a public stage where their fall would be witnessed by everyone. Jonathan Wellington's death happened on a Thursday morning exactly 5 months and 12 days after he reunited with his daughter. Magnolia told me she was by his side when he took his last breath holding his hand, while he smiled with his eyes closed at peace, because he knew he had done everything he could to protect her. He died knowing she was ready, that she was legally armored, and that she had in hand all the necessary tools to take over the empire and destroy anyone who tried to stop her. The funeral was discreet, only close family, and a few trusted executives, but the news of his death leaked quickly to corporate circles. And that was when Raymond Wellington, the corrupt uncle, thought he had won. He called an emergency shareholder meeting for the following week, planning to officially take total control of Wellington Global Industries before Magnolia could react. But what Raymond did not know was that Jonathan had spent the last few months reorganizing everything. He transferred shares through irrevocable trusts, created armored clauses in a will registered in 3 different states, and ensured that at the moment of his death, Magnolia would automatically become the majority shareholder with 52% of the company's shares. Raymond discovered this only 48 hours before the meeting, when Magnolia's lawyers sent a formal notification informing that she, Magnolia Grace Wellington, legitimate daughter and heir, recognized by DNA tests and irrevocable court decision, would be present at the shareholder meeting not as a guest, but as chair of the board. The shock was so great that Raymond tried to cancel the meeting, but it was too late. The summons had already been issued, the specialized press had already been notified, and canceling now would be admitting defeat before the battle even began. The meeting happened in the main auditorium of the Wellington Global Industries headquarters, a 40-story building in the heart of Manhattan's financial district. 200 shareholders, executives, lawyers, and specialized journalists were present. Raymond entered confidently, wearing a tailored suit and an arrogant smile, believing that even with Magnolia being the majority shareholder, he could manipulate the board and maintain operational control. He went up to the stage, adjusted the microphone, and started talking about the company's expansion plans under his leadership. It was then that the auditorium doors opened and Magnolia entered. She was no longer disguised as Malene Grant. She was herself. Loose hair, elegant black dress, unshakable posture, accompanied by Catherine Aldridge and a team of lawyers carrying boxes of documents. The silence that fell over that auditorium was deafening. Raymond stopped mid-sentence, his face losing color as he tried to process who that woman was, walking toward the stage with absolute authority. Magnolia walked up the steps slowly, took another microphone, and said with a clear voice that echoed through the entire space, "My name is Magnolia Grace Wellington. I am the daughter of Jonathan Wellington, recognized by DNA tests and irrevocable court decision. I am the majority shareholder of this company, with 52% of the shares, and from this moment on, I officially assume the presidency of the board." The murmur that exploded in the audience was a mix of shock, confusion, and fascination. Raymond tried to protest, but Catherine was already handing the board members certified copies of all the legal documents proving every word Magnolia had said. But she did not stop there. Magnolia looked directly at Raymond and said, "Before we proceed with this company's business, I must inform the board and those present that an internal investigation has revealed systematic fraud committed by Mr. Raymond Wellington during his management." She made a signal and the team of lawyers started distributing dossiers. At the same time, the auditorium screens lit up showing spreadsheets, emails, bank transfers, and documents, proving embezzlement, overpriced contracts, bribes, and money laundering. Raymond tried to leave the stage, but two federal agents entered through the side door. They were there because Magnolia had handed all the evidence to the FBI 3 days earlier. As Raymond was escorted out in handcuffs, she turned to the audience and said, "Now we can start cleaning this house." And in that moment, she was no longer the discarded orphan, she was the empress of her own destiny. With Raymond handcuffed and escorted out of the auditorium, Magnolia did not waste time. She knew she had the attention of everyone present, and that this was the moment to use the absolute power Jonathan had left in her hand. She asked for silence and announced there was one more urgent matter to be addressed before ending the meeting. This company holds investments and properties in various sectors. She began, "One of these investments is the commercial building located on Lexington Avenue, number 423, where the headquarters of Ashford Properties currently operates." The name Ashford echoed through the auditorium, and some journalists already started writing furiously, sensing that something big was about to happen. She continued, "I would like to inform the board that as of today, this lease agreement will be terminated due to breach of contract clauses and late payments." As she spoke, she made a signal, and her team started distributing another set of documents. This time, it was proof of Gregory Ashford's real estate fraud, overpriced contracts, documented bribes, properties sold with fake valuations, and money laundering schemes through shell companies. Everything was there, organized, dated with names and signatures. Magnolia explained that Wellington Global Industries had been indirectly used by Gregory to give credibility to fraudulent deals, and that she was handing all this information to the competent authorities at that exact moment. She looked directly at the cameras broadcasting the meeting live and said corruption will not be tolerated in any company or partner associated with the Wellington name. Gregory Ashford did not even know yet that he was being publicly exposed while eating breakfast in his mansion. But Magnolia was not done. She took another microphone, and her voice became more personal, more controlled, sharper. "A few months ago, I was married to Lucas Ashford, Gregory's son, during this marriage. I worked 3 jobs to support our life while he built his career. I invested $8,000 of my savings in his company. I was publicly humiliated at a Christmas party, kicked out of a mansion in the snow, and forced to sign divorce papers that left me with nothing. The silence in the auditorium was absolute. No one breathed." She continued, "I recently discovered that during our marriage, Mr. Lucas Ashford forged my signature on financial documents, opened fraudulent lines of credit in my name, and embezzled my savings to cover personal debts. All these debts, duly documented, are being transferred back to his name through a legal process that was approved this morning." And then came the final blow, the cruelest and the fairest. Magnolia made a gesture, and the auditorium screens changed images. A series of photos and medical documents appeared. She explained with a cold and precise voice, Lucas Ashford's current wife, Diane Morrison, publicly announced she was pregnant by him 6 months ago. However, DNA tests conducted discreetly through legally collected genetic material proved that the biological father of the child is not Lucas Ashford, but a tennis instructor named Marcus Delacroix, with whom Ms. Morrison maintained a relationship before and during the engagement to my ex-husband. The bomb dropped. The photos showed Diane and Marcus together. The dates matched perfectly with the start of the pregnancy, and the DNA reports were authenticated by internationally recognized laboratories. Magnolia was not just destroying Lucas financially, she was destroying the very foundation of the sham he called a new family. She turned off the microphone, handed final documents to Catherine Aldridge, and left the stage as the auditorium exploded in conversations, camera flashes, and urgent calls from journalists rushing to publish the biggest corporate and social bomb of the year. Magnolia told me that when she left that building, her phone would not stop ringing. Lucas called 17 times in half an hour, then Diane, then Gregory begging to talk, offering a deal, begging for mercy. She blocked all numbers. There was nothing left to talk about. Justice had been served, cold, public, and absolute. But as we walked through the streets of New York that night, she told me something that showed the story had not ended yet. Revenge is not about destroying Driver. It is about rebuilding what was broken. and that was exactly what she would do in the final chapter. In the weeks following that historic meeting, the fall of the Ashford family was swift and brutal. Gregory was indicted for real estate fraud, money laundering, and bribery of public officials. Investigations revealed that his empire was sustained by decades of crimes he hid behind expensive lawyers and respectable surnames. He tried to negotiate a plea deal, but had nothing valuable enough to trade for freedom. Veronica, his wife, saw all bank accounts, blocked assets confiscated, and her reputation destroyed in the social circles where she reigned as a poisonous queen. Lucas lost everything. The company closed its doors. Creditors took the apartment and the car, and Diane left him a week after the DNA was publicly exposed, taking with her the baby he discovered was not his, and leaving behind only lawsuits and humiliation. Magnolia could have settled for just revenge, but she knew destroying enemies does not fill the void they left, so she used the power and fortune Jonathan left her to do something that would change lives for real. She created the Magnolia Grace Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to helping orphans and vulnerable youth. With part of the inheritance, she bought land in underserved areas of New York and built quality, affordable housing, not those concrete boxes where they deposit the poor, but dignified homes with infrastructure, security, and hope. She also created a scholarship fund that paid for full college tuition for young people who, like her, had worked their whole lives but never had a chance to study. She told me that one of the most important moments of her new life was when she visited one of the shelters where she had lived after the woman who raised her died. She entered that place that held memories of cold nights and scarce meals, but this time not as the invisible girl no one wanted to adopt. She entered as Magnolia Grace Wellington and announced she was making a donation of $2 million to completely renovate the shelter, hire qualified staff, and ensure no child there went through the same hardships she went through. The children did not understand the magnitude of it, but the staff cried because they knew she could have simply forgotten where she came from, but chose to come back and rebuild. 6 months after taking over Wellington Global Industries, Magnolia was sitting in the office that had been Jonathan's, looking out the window at the city that almost swallowed her but was now at her feet. She told me that on that day she visited her real parents' grave for the first time since Jonathan's funeral. Snow was falling slowly over the cemetery, and she stood there before the marble tombstones, talking quietly to the people she never knew, but who loved her in the only way they could, looking until the end. She placed white flowers on the graves and whispered something no one else heard, but she told me later, "I promise I will make it worth it. I promise I will not waste this second chance." And when she left that cemetery, she no longer carried anger. She no longer carried pain. She carried purpose. Her story did not end with the Ashfords in jail or in misery. It ended with her realizing that the best revenge is not making the enemy suffer. It is becoming so big that they become irrelevant. Lucas tried to contact her months later, asking for financial help, saying he was living with his mother in a rented apartment and could not get a job because no one wanted to hire someone with a destroyed reputation. She did not reply. She did not block. She just left the message there unanswered, because he did not even deserve the effort of anger. And it was exactly this story she told me during that ride through the New York snow, while the city blinked its indifferent lights outside and I drove in silence, just listening to every word coming out of the mouth of that woman who had died and resurrected with another name and another destiny. When we arrived at her destination, an imposing building in Manhattan's financial center, with a doorman in white gloves and an Italian marble lobby, she no longer looked like the victim of that Christmas night. She looked like the owner of the entire city. She paid for the ride, gave me a generous tip, and before leaving looked at me in the mirror one last time and said something I carry to this day: "The world turns driver. Just make sure you are driving the car and not getting run over by it." She left the door closed, and I stood there thinking about how many people give up in the middle of the storm without knowing the turnaround was 3 steps away. The question I ask you now is, will you accept humiliation as a final sentence, or will you use it as fuel to build something so big your enemies become irrelevant? Are you waiting for divine justice, or are you willing to stand up and create your own justice with work, strategy, and courage? If this story made your blood boil and then cool down with this poetic justice, you need to be part of our community. Subscribe to the channel now, hit the like button to strengthen this journey and activate the notification bell so you do not miss any story that will teach you what real life hides. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that the game only ends when the last card is played, and that while you are breathing, there is still time to flip the table. See you on the next ride, because this city has stories you won't believe until you hear them.